Welcome to the podcast, Whiskey and a Map. Stories of adventure and expeditions as told by those who live them. I'm your host, Michael Reinhardt. It has been said that many adventures and expeditions start simply with a map and a glass of whiskey. A desire to go and see the world's wild places. You're invited to pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of your favorite whiskey, and join us as we hear stories from another one of our friends just returned from the field. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. The Whiskey and a Map podcast opens its fourth season with Brent Bishop, a mountaineer and explorer. Brent has climbed the highest peaks around the world. In the process, he has encountered Chechen mafia, murderous Papuans, and killing avalanches. Brent, welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Brent, as is the custom here at Whiskey and a Map, do you have a good drinking story for us?
Yeah, I do. I've been climbing a long time, and it seems in the old days there was a lot of drinking on expeditions, and there are a lot of stories. But a couple of them that really stand out to me is I was guiding Mount Everest in the late 90s. It was the height of sort of the Chechen separatist movement. And we were on our way to Everest, and we were down near Mineral Vode in the Caucasus region. And we went to this park just to kind of walk around on one of our travel days and just get some exercise and some air. And we have a pretty small group. I think there were 6 of us. And all of a sudden, these 2 large blacked out BMWs, like these sedans, just pulled up to the park. And out of the first sedan jumped 2 guys with, they're in pinstripe suits, and their suits have like spats. They're wearing spats. They look like they're from a 1940s gangster movie. And they've got Kalashnikovs. And they get out and they kind of look around, and they're obviously like the bodyguards. And then the next car pulls up, and these guys get out as well. And a couple of them have Kalashnikovs, and there's obviously a guy in charge. And he kind of comes over to us and starts, he asks a couple of questions, and they're really kind of nonplussed by that we're there to climb. I mean, they're a little interested. And then one of the guys on our trip was this big, rough-looking guy that looked like, he was an ex-Marine. Well, you're always a Marine, so he was a Marine, but he was out of the service. And one of the guys just came over and looked at him and clasped him on the shoulder. And this guy, his name was Brat. He looked at the big Chechen, and he just like whacked him on the shoulder, and then like everybody laughed. And then the Chechen guy gave him a bear hug and kind of tossed him down. And then the Brat, our buddy, he picked up the Chechen and kind of tossed him down, and everybody was like quiet for a second, and then everybody started laughing because it's sort of an odd kind of tense situation with these guys in this park. And then they took Brat. Like they just put it, they kind of grabbed him, and they said, he's coming with us to drink. And so for the next 24 hours, we thought Brat had been stolen by Chechen separatists on the way into the mountain. And apparently they were so impressed with Brat and his attitude, they took him on a 24-hour drinking binge. So he was finally returned to us, and it took us another 24 hours to kind of get him sober and moving, because these guys drink hard. And that was sort of these 90 vignettes in guiding in strange places and odd things happening. And yeah, we thought we lost Brat on the way to Mount Everest, and it turned out the Chechens just stole him for 24 hours and plied him with a lot of vodka.
That's an extreme way to get a drinking buddy.
It is. We're climbers, and we're looking around like, this is really odd. But they just zeroed in on him, like, because Brat was a big, tough guy. You could just tell that he was different than your average climber in terms of his, ability to drink and brawl. And they zeroed in on him, and they stole him. It was sort of a funny vignette on the way to, climb a mountain.
Tell me about your first introduction to Scotch.
Yeah, I was on a climb early on to Amet Blanc. It was around 2000. I was we took alcohol with us, and being Americans, we took bourbon. There weren't very many people on Mount Blanc during this period of time. And you actually climbed the mountain, there weren't 100 tents at base camp that looked like Agincourt and fixed lines all over the mountain. So it was a fun mountain to guide because you got to actually climb it and guide it in a real manner. And there was a small team next to us, and it was run by a guy named Henry Todd, this Brit that had been around and climbing in Nepal and Asia for ages. He was sort of this old school Brit. And he was great at telling stories, and an amazing guy. And when I found out that when he found out I was drinking Jack Daniels, he kind of dismissed me and brought out a bottle of scotch. And these sort of like I said, these vignettes to share these connections with people. And someone like Henry Todd, who he was cut from a different era. He was a wild man. The rumor goes, and it was substantiated, that he did 7 years in prison for being, I think, the largest LSD dealer in England at a time. And so people called him 7-Year Henry because of that. But these are the people you met in the 80s and 90s that were in Nepal at the time before things really tipped. But yeah, I'll give Henry Todd credit for teaching me how to drink good scotch and developing my palate for it. And it continues this day. And every once in a while in Nepal over the last couple of years, I'd run into Henry, and he's still out there doing interesting things.
He's still out there going.
Yeah, he is. It's amazing. He's not in jail, and he's a wonderful character from a different era.
Growing up with famous adventure expedition parents, tell us about your mother and your father.
So, yeah, I was lucky enough to be born into a family that this was normal stuff, right? So people in the past have asked me, how I came to climbing. And as I kind of say, as much as I picked climbing, it picked me. Nurture and nature worked hand in hand as a kid growing up in this type of family. So, my father worked for National Geographic, but he started climbing when he was quite young. At 19, he was at Dartmouth, and he came up with the idea to do the west buttress of Denali, the first ascent of it. And so he wrote away to this famous aerial photographer and climber and scientist at the time, Brad Washburn, and Brad sent him some photos. And so my father and his climbing partner were going off to do this, and Brad then sort of hijacked that trip in 1951. So it was my father, Brad Washburn, and a couple of people. And, it was my dad's idea. And my dad and Brad and these guys did the first ascent of the West Buttress of Denali in 1951 for a 19-year-old kid from Cincinnati. That's setting the bar pretty high. And then, his career with National Geographic, it led him to a bunch of photography assignments and climbing assignments. And he was a scientist, and he was a glaciologist at this time. So he had a master's in glaciology, and he went in 60 and 61 to Nepal to do research on Mount Blanc, what was called the Silver Hut Expedition. And Mount Blanc is this amazing peak in the Khumbu Valley. And this team of 4 scientists, they put this, what was called the Silver Hut. They built basically an insulated Quonset hut on the Ningbo Glacier at 18,000 feet and spent the winter there and collecting research. And it was under Ed Hillary's permits. And then, they stared up at Mount Blanc during that winter the whole time, and they were very well acclimated. So in, 61, they did the first ascent of Mount Blanc. And then, of course, in 63, he was with the first American expedition and climbed Everest in 63. Yeah, that set the bar pretty high. My father certainly being in the pantheon of American mountaineering, and in an era that's that golden age of American climbing in the Himalayas. My mother, I actually find her to be equally impressive, right? So here's this gal from Cincinnati, Ohio, that hasn't traveled very much, and she marries my father. And one of the first trips is she's responsible for getting all the scientific equipment on a ship in Europe for that 61 scientific trip that my father was on in Mount Blanc. And she was just, on a boat to India and then had to get the equipment on trucks and have it overland delivered with her on the trucks to Kathmandu and then get it, hauled into the Khumbu region. And then she spent that winter of 60-61 as the expedition liaison, which is, that's sort of, it put her in this, it just thrust her into this sort of life of adventure. And then, 1963, she led the first commercial trip to Everest Base Camp ever, right? Because there were some Americans that thought it might be an interesting idea to go to Everest Base Camp and say hello to the expedition. And, my mom had been there 2 years before, which not many, weren't very many Westerners that had even been in country at that time or done that type of trekking. So my mom led treks ever since. I kind of liken her as the matriarch of American trek leaders. And then like adventure travel, I always laugh at all these people that are talking about these great adventures in their new Sprinter vans and what they're doing. And in 1968 to 1970, my mother and my father loaded up the two kids, my sister and me, and we were 2 and 4, and they had this International Harvester, which is a predecessor to the Suburban, and they got Airstream trailers to give them or lend them an Airstream, and they loaded it up on the QE2, which was that big passenger liner, and we all went over to Rotterdam with the trailer and the Suburban, and then my parents drove all the way through Europe, the Middle East, through Central Asia, Afghanistan, through the Khyber Pass, through Pakistan, down to the Indian, subcontinent, and then all the way to Kathmandu, where they dropped it off. So here's this lady with like 2 toddlers, basically, driving around the world with an Airstream trailer and didn't think anything of it, right? So I roll my eyes about like this new age of, van life, adventure travel, like, this was 50 years earlier, and true adventure. Like we talked about whiskey and a map, there was probably a lot of whiskey and a lot of maps that were looked at. And then my parents marched the kids out into, we trekked out to Western Nepal, this area called Jumla, and we lived in a tent for the next 16 months while my father collected research for his doctorate. And that was really how I got connected with Sherpas, because we had a couple of Sherpas that were helping my dad with his research. And then there was a Sherpa named Kansha Sherpa that basically took care of me. Basically he was my nanny. So I look at it in my formative years, I was sort of feral and raised by Sherpas. So that's an excuse I stick to.
Tell us about him. What are your memories of him as you were growing up?
When you're a kid at that age, 2 to 4, it's hard to remember like what's real and what you remember from photographs, right? But Kansha, he lived in the Khumbu Valley and in Namche Bazaar, which is the center of the Sherpa community in the Khumbu Valley. And as I started going back as a young climber in the early 90s, I'd go and visit him. Every expedition or trek that I was involved with, I'd go see him in Namche. And I'd go have tea with him and talk to him and show him photos of the family and my mother. And he's a national treasure because he's the last living member. When he was a boy, he was a cook boy on the 1953 Hillary Tenzing expedition. And then he was on the 63 Everest Expedition. So he's the last of this connection, and he's still alive, and it's amazing. So that connection goes, from 1968 to just now, which is a lovely, way to be connected to a culture that's is really imprinted on me, and I owe so much to.
Well, let's go to the start of your climbing career. How'd that come about?
Well, my father was a climber, so we did a lot of climbing when I was a kid at the local crags, and then family trips to the Tetons and getting dragged up stuff by my dad and his friends. And this was always a terrifying experience. Like, this is not like, I would put it under the heading of forced family fun, right? Like, I was terrified when I was younger. And then as I got older, it just sort of fell in place. And then by the time I was late in high school and into college, I was climbing, anytime I could. I was traveling to climb. I was working jobs to go climb. I was climbing, while I was at school. And then I started working as a climbing guide in Jackson Hole Mountain Guides in the Tetons in 1986. And I started as an apprentice guide, and I hauled loads and helped with beginning and intermediate classes. And you either do well or you don't. And it seemed like it was a good fit. And then I sort of graduated through the ranks to being a full-on guide. And that was sort of the cornerstone of really cutting my teeth in the alpine world and in the Tetons, which really feels like home to me. So I think I must have done 7 seasons guiding in the Tetons in the early days, on and off. And then, of course, that was a different era where, you guided a little bit and then you went off and climbed, and whether it was, to Alaska or to South America or had enough money to go to Yosemite, it was a different era in the 80s and into the early 90s.
Throughout your career, what is the most memorable climb for you?
I would say, the first Everest trip was a really important climb for me because it was 1994. We got to climb Everest in good style, although we didn't realize it was sort of the end of an era. There were 5 guys on our team. We had 2 Sherpas with us that we all acted like equal members. We hauled loads, we cooked, we fixed lines. We got to, all chip in and help fix lines on the loads they face. And then, in that time, you left Camp 4 with just your ice axe, and you climbed to the summit without any fixed lines, and you climbed back down. And this was sort of normal, but at that time, everybody was, if you were on Everest, you were a seasoned mountaineer. You had this skill set that you picked up in other places. I mean, I'd already been on Denali at that time. I had climbed Aconcagua. I had climbed all over the U.S. and Canada. So this graduation to these Himalayan peaks was, that was sort of the progression, right? If you were over in the Himalayas, you had a skill set and you had an understanding, and you were truly a climber / mountaineer. And I think that, I got to literally and figuratively follow in my father's footsteps in 94. And we were able to summit, and we were an environmental team on that trip. And the Nepalese government had restricted permits to one team per season per year, because there was a little bit of bad press. If you can imagine, in the 90s, really early 90s, nobody was there, but there was a little bit of bad press for trash on the mountain and too many expeditions, which is kind of odd to think of about that today, given how things have progressed. And so we had an environmental permit. And so there were no stipulations. He still had to pay the climbing fee. And we went over there and we implemented an environmental program that first year we got 5,000 pounds of trash off the mountain. So we showed that you could be a hardcore climbing expedition. We got 4 out of 5 of us on the summit, 2 without oxygen, and we got 5,000 pounds of trash off the mountain, right? So it showed that the 2 were mutually exclusive. And we instituted this economic buyback system. Basically, we put a bounty on trash and oxygen bottles up high that just like, if the 5-cent deposit on aluminum cans in a city, you won't see any aluminum cans. And because the Sherpas that are on the mountain and, they want to make more money, it's very mercenary. So if they're hauling a load up and they're getting paid a little bit of money to haul the load up, then they get paid some money to bring some trash down when they're coming down empty. So it was a very proactive way to address this trash on the mountain. And then I was able, not sort of going off on a tangent, but was able to get some funding for it. And I ran that program for the next 5 years, and we got down over 25,000 pounds of trash off the mountain. And all I did was just tap into the expeditions that were on the mountain and use their Sherpas. And then I was able to get a bunch of the commercial teams to donate money and help with their personnel. And it was a very effective way to address a problem that needed to be addressed. And it worked out. So when I look back at that 94 team, being able to climb in good style, being able to follow literally and figuratively in my father's footsteps, and then establish this environmental buyback program, which we call the Sagarmatha Environmental Expedition. It was an amazing trip, and I think and there's some bittersweet things there. So I summited in May, and my father was the guy. He did a lot of things, but he never talked about them, and he never looked in the rear view mirror. Right? He walked the walk, but didn't talk a lot about this stuff. So I remember I made a call on this sat phone, like the first of its kind from Everest Base Camp, and it was a big briefcase. It looked like something out of James Bond. It had this a red circle slash with basically your crotch area, because it was like you weren't supposed to stand in front of the antenna because it would give you testicular cancer, and it cost like $15 a minute, right? And, we were broke. So wow. I called him and I said, I summited, and he said, how are your, any frostbite? Because he lost his hand, his finger, a few digits on his fingers and his toes in 63 because he, that foursome bivvied at, 28,000 feet without oxygen and tent. So he asked if I had, any frostbite, and I said no, and he said, congratulations, well done. And that's the last we talked about it, right? I mean, that's just, all right, it's time to get on. And then tragically, so that was in May, and tragically in 94, in September of 94, he was killed in a car accident. So we didn't really get to process and overlap. And as I wish, things happen, and I feel robbed that I wasn't able to share more about his climbing experiences on the mountain and mine, and then my further climbing on Everest and other peaks around the world.
Yeah, it's a shame. You use the word or the phrase climbing in style. What does that mean? Well,
to me, and I define myself as a climber. It really is, it's who I am. Like I said earlier, as much as I've picked it, it's picked me. And the things that I love about climbing are you've got this acquired skill set that's taken time and experience, right? And out of that experience comes judgment and ability to understand and mitigate risk. Those are, it's an essential part of climbing to me. And then you've got the partnerships, which are so important. Like, how you climb together, how you safeguard each other. It's one of the things I like most about climbing is these relationships in the mountains. So you've got like skill, partnerships, risk, and how you approach a mountain, right? And that to me embodies, what mountaineering is about, like decision making, figuring it out, right? Like, there's no secret way to the top. It's about, preparation, perseverance, and problem solving. I think that, and those are the things that give me the most joy, and they're the most fulfilling aspect. Even if you fail on a mountain, right? You've learned a lot about yourself. You venture out into the unknown. It's truly adventure. And now I think that the way that these 8,000 meter peaks are being approached, it's moved from mountaineering to adventure travel, right? So, if you go to Everest now, the lines are fixed all the way up the mountain, all the way to the summit, right? You've got guides, and I'll say, guides will include Sherpa guides, Nepalese guides, Western guides on the mountain, and they're doing all the work for you, right? It's amazingly colonial in a way. Like, you don't set up one camp, you don't haul one load, you don't melt one pot of water, you don't cook one, meal for yourself, and you go on oxygen at 4+ liters a minute from Camp 2 on fixed lines. Now, so to me, that takes away the unknown. So if you stay healthy on Everest and you're reasonably fit, there's a high degree that you're going to summit, but you haven't embodied, these elements that I think about in climbing and mountaineering. You've had an amazing adventure travel vacation. And I don't mean to be critical about this, because we all get to do hard things, and we each get to define what's hard for ourselves, right? But my issue in this new digital age is that people are presenting it that they've conquered Everest, that they've gone off and they've climbed this 8,000 meter or that 8,000 meter peak, and they're not giving credit or being honest about the style, right? I think, at the end of the day, one of the most important things about climbing and being a mountaineer or an adventurer is you have to make decisions. You have to figure it out, right? Whatever you're doing, if you're in the Amazon, whatever kind of expedition, overland, trekking, when you're looking at that map and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, you have to make decisions. I'm very positive about guiding. I'm just negative about the new Instagram culture that isn't being truthful.
You and your family have had this long, deep connection with Everest, and you've summited how many times?
I've summited and I've been on, I think, the mountain 6 times. So my father climbed in 63, and then the first time was 94 for me. And then I summited again in 2002, and then was on in 2012 and 16 and 17. So I've been able to be on the mountain in a number of different capacities. That first trip, I felt like we got to climb it in good style. By 2002, a lot of lines were fixed up high, and my partner Pete Athens and I tried the West Ridge without oxygen and without Sherpa support. We got blown off the mountain. That just wasn't going to happen. When people hear that Everest, there are too many people and it's crowded, well, you got to remember that's one route per season, and it only gets really crowded when the fixing of the lines and the weather kind of pushes everybody into a short window.
The West Ridge is infamously tough.
It's infinitely tough. It's very committing. And I think that the time that we were on it, only a handful of people had climbed the West Ridge. And I think there had been 18 expeditions on it, and something like 32 people had been killed. So it is a very committing and difficult route. And
what makes it so tough?
Well, it's long, it's exposed. There's a lot of technical climbing on it that you're not going to climb it in expedition style. You have to climb it in alpine style, in that true mountaineering climbing partnership. And you've got to be able to move over terrain at altitude that's difficult. And it's a beautiful line when you look at it. You can understand it sort of embodies what a committing line at altitude looks like. So in 2002, we were there making a movie with National Geographic called Surviving Everest, and it looked at the Everest through the eyes of the sons of some of the first climbers. So it was I was the connection to the first American team. Peter Hillary was the obvious connection to the first successful team, and his father, Sir Edmund Hillary, and then Jamling Norgay was the connection. He's the son of Tenzing Norgay. So the main part of our expedition was doing the Southwest Ridge, and we were trying to do the West Ridge without oxygen and Sherpa support. And it was very clear that the climbing was too difficult. for us, and that we weren't moving fast enough and the conditions weren't great. So we came back down and we joined the main team and we summited via the Southwest Ridge, and we carried camera equipment up there, and it was an amazing trip to be with Pete Athens and to be with John Ling and to be with Peter Hillary. And the movie's it's good. It's a 20-year-old movie, but it's a nice look at Everest. So that was 2002. And then I went back in 2012 to help with the movie and commemorate the 50th anniversary of the American team in 1963. And so again, a group of us, Dave Morton, Jake Norton, Charlie Mason, myself, tried the West Ridge again without oxygen and without Sherpa support. And we got up to the ridge proper or just below it, but the conditions had deteriorated even the 10 years from when I was on it in 2002. Global warming is the thing. I mean, all you have to do is look at the glacier recession. And so on these snowfields that we moved over pretty efficiently 10 years earlier, like the ice was gone and it was rotten, and it was really poor, dangerous climbing through these rock bands with this rotten ice just to get to the West Ridge proper. And we worked on that route really hard for a long time. And, Dave Morton and Jake and Charlie, I mean, these are, I think we had like 17 Everest summits between us at this time, or something unreasonably high. So these are really fine mountaineers. It's a privilege to climb with these guys, and we pulled the plug because it wasn't going to happen, right? And it's a testament to how difficult that route is, but even more so that Tom Hornbein and Willie Unsold did it in 1963 with the first American team, and that really represents, like, if you think about it, that's the most significant American ascent in the Himalayas, and it was 1963, and that holds today.
You use the term alpine style as opposed to expedition style.
There's a difference. So alpine style it's a small group that's self-sufficient, that does not fix lines. So expedition style, you get to base camp, you start to acclimate, and you fix lines through any of the sections that are difficult, right? And that those lines are then a lifeline to get up and down. And it's a style that's safe, and it's a little bit cumbersome, and it takes a lot of work. And then on the other side, there's alpine style, where whether it's your partner or with your one or two other people, where you belay each other up and you bring the ropes up as you go. Basically, more of a tradition. So you go light and fast, and you're committing yourself to the route. You got to figure it out, and if you're going to have to go down, you're going to have to figure that out as well, because you haven't left lines in place that facilitate movement easily. So it's a more pure style of climbing. And if you look at cutting edge climbing today, it's all alpine style, and these young men and women are doing stuff that is just mind-boggling hard and committing. Like, it's really amazing to see what's being done on an alpine style in the Himalayas. And it's almost as though, like, the two styles aren't anywhere the same. No, they're not even close, because you've got this adventure travel on these big peaks now, like Everest and Oyu and Manaslu, and the lines are fixed and there are camps everywhere. And then you've got, on the other end of the spectrum, these men and women that their skill set is so refined and their commitment level is so high. They're doing things that are technically so brilliant and committing, you can't wrap your head around. Like, it's two different species.
You do a lot of search and rescue work now, and we'll get to that a bit later. But you had an episode, I believe, on Everest where you engaged in a rescue. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was guiding Everest in 2017. And I've been really lucky to be on Everest in a number of different capacities. So I was on it as climbing in good style in 94. And those West Ridge trips, even though they weren't successful, they were good style. And then filming on Everest, I've done a bunch of, being part of films. And it's a different way to look at the mountain and a different way you've got to work. And then I had the opportunity in 15 and 16, actually 16 and 17, to guide on Everest, which, I really enjoyed that as well, because you're helping people, get to the summit and you're really working with them to fulfill their dreams, right? And, because I've already summited, I've already checked that off. And so climbing in this other capacity is really fulfilling. And I've really enjoyed that process. And in 17, there was another guide and myself, and we each had one climber with us. Both these climbers were like unreasonably strong, right? Like they were not your stereotypical, climber on a commercial expedition. They were young, they were fit, they were motivated, they were humble, right? It was like an ideal situation. And so we got up to the South Col, and then we had 3 Sherpas with us helping, but everybody was equally strong and everybody was carrying their own oxygen. And we got up just below the South Summit, and this kind of, you've got a headlamp on because it's dark, and you're in this sort of very kind of myopic kind of like, you've got the glow of the headlamp. It's dark out, and you're kind of disoriented, and it's windy and it's cold, and you're way above 8,000 meters, and you got your down suit on, and it's kind of like you're in your own world for sure. And all of a sudden, this guy kind of stumbles out of the dark and into, our headlamp area, and he's mumbling, and he's borderline non-ambulatory, and we get to him and we try to shoot him up with dexamethasone, which is a drug you use at altitude to try to keep people up and going when they've got cerebral edema. It kind of opens up the window to try to move them down, and the guy collapses. So we're at the balcony, which I think is 27.5 or so, 27.6, somewhere up there. It's pretty high, and it's dark, and this guy he's alive, but he's sort of moaning and trying to crawl. And so we look at each other and we go, all right, we got to do something, right? And this is a testament to the 2 young climbers I was with. I had a 40-foot section of rope, and they were like, well, we're not going to the summit, right? Yeah, we're going to help get this guy down, which, you hear a lot about, people passing people on, people in trouble on Everest and like bad behavior and, where's the humanity? Well, these guys immediately said, all right, we're in. And it turned out that I had a 40-foot section of small rope that I on summit day I like because it gives me some options to pass people on fixed lines or safeguard, each other moving in odd terrain if things get a little weird. And so I ended up taking that cord, and I took one of the Sherpas, Tashi Sherpa. We ended up dragging this guy down for, the next 6-7 hours to get him down to base camp. To Camp 4 at the South Col at 8,000 meters. And it was brutal. In theory, it shouldn't have felt that hard, but just dragging this guy down with this on the fixed lines with this 40-foot piece of cord, where we did the system where one person, put it through their belay device and lowered the non-ambulatory guy with the other person dragging him 40-foot sections all the way down. This 1,200 feet down there. This kid, Tashi, the Sherpa, God, he was so strong. Like I'd do 1 or 2 40-foot pulls, and I couldn't move, but I felt like I hit the wall. And we've got oxygen going, and then Tashi would just he'd do 10 sections at a time. And it was, we dragged him all the way down because, what are you going to do, right? Like, I think we're confronted with things, and there's a right thing and a wrong thing to do. And I was really proud that the that the two young climbers that, their goal was to climb Everest, and the other guide and the other Sherpas were like, oh yeah, we're going down. But it turned out that the two of us could be efficient enough, and the other guys went up and they summited. But we dragged this guy all the way down, and we got into the South Col and into medical attention, and then he died. And it turned out to be, it was some Slovakian guy that I think he was sort of on the mountain in a what I'd call a bandit capacity. I don't think he had paid a permit fee, and he was with some budget Nepalese outfitter, and nobody was taking any responsibility for him. And he was trying to climb Everest without oxygen. It was a weird thing. But again, in the mountains, sometimes you come across these situations that, to me, there's a right thing to do. And I would have liked to get a fourth ascent of the mountain, but I didn't. But this is what you do. And in fact, my mother, who doesn't look in the rear view mirror at all, said, when somehow she heard about this story, I don't even think I told her. She did say, of all your climbing, because she's a non-pulse-bike climber, she thinks we're all kind of silly and self-absorbed. She said, what you did on that summit day, it makes me the most proud of all your climbing. So that went a long way. But, these things happen. You got a lot of people on a mountain, and a lot of them are unprepared, even with the fixed lines, and things go bad up high. So, yeah, that was that last trip in 2017.
Let me switch gears on you. In all of your climbing and expedition experiences, what's the strangest thing you've ever come across?
Oh, wow. I mean, most of the time, if if you planned and, you're not blindsided, but it was 10 years ago or so, maybe as long as, time goes on, about 15 years ago, I was guiding a trip to Karsten's Pyramid. And this was in the day where you had to go through the jungle to get to climb the mountain, because now you can fly in. The problem is there's a mine that borders Karsten's Pyramid, and the mine now lets you fly in on a helicopter basically to the base camp. But in the past, they didn't want you to do that because they were kind of in the midst of a civil war, and there was a bunch of tribal fighting. And so you had to hike in like 5 or 6 days. I can't remember.
Now, where is this at?
Papua New Guinea. So it's on the Papua side, in New Guinea. It's kind of crazy. Like you hike for 12 hours a day in the mud and the rain and over roots and up and down things. And, you got to cross these rivers, and you got to walk on the side of these ravines. And I remember thinking to myself, if anybody slips here, we are not getting the body back. This is raging torrents in the jungle. As soon as we got to the mountain and we got to employ the use of ropes and protection, it was a sigh of relief. Okay, now we can safeguard people correctly. You wouldn't think that because it sort of looks steep and vertical, and it's this limestone monolith in the middle of nowhere. But the jungle was the scariest part. But so you fly in, and there's all these shenanigans that I won't get into. But you have these pop-in porters that from whatever access point in the jungle, you take the villagers from that access point. And so and it seems like both men and women, help carry your gear. And basically they're porters to help get your gear in, and you pay them. And we get to the first stream crossing, and we're going to have lunch. And so we all stop. And I've got this Indonesian guide with us that speaks Papuan, because I'd be totally lost. And this Indonesian guide counterpart makes it all happen. And you work with him. And this guy that I worked with, his name was Kat. He was funny and sarcastic. But we're sitting there eating our lunch, and all of a sudden there's this commotion. This happened really quickly. I turned around, and like 8 feet from me, these two Papuan women, and these women are like 4'8", right? Like the Papuans aren't a big people. If you look at photos of them, they're not very tall. And these two women are obviously in a very heated exchange and argument. One picks up a machete and is trying to kill the other one. And this is going on 10 feet from where we're eating lunch, and picks up the machete and is coming to like cleave the other lady's head. And that other woman is quite fast, and she gets under the blow of the machete. So it kind of goes over, and I think it like cut her calf a bit. But then it goes down onto the ground, and then the woman that got under the blow and wasn't killed picks up a rock, and she's trying to kill the other woman with this rock. Right now, this happened very quickly, and it's right in front of us, and all of us, we can't believe what's going on because it's so violent and so quick. Then a couple of the Papuan guys grab the women, and they separate them, and the women are still like these little angry bumblebees trying to get at each other. We're shocked, like we don't know what's going on. And Kat, the Indonesian guide I'm working with, he's smoking a cigarette. He's just sort of leaning up against a rock, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? And he's like, they don't like each other. That's what he tells me. I'm like, I can tell they don't like each other. They just tried to kill each other. And he goes, yeah, that's wife number 1 and wife number 3, and they don't like each other. So then the solution to the problem was the whole group, the Papuans, not us, they ran wife number 3 out of the camp. And then for the next day, she kept on trying to attack the other lady again, but finally gave up. And it was relatively smooth sailing from then into the base camp. But those are things that you don't like. I can deal with the weather. I can deal with technical difficulties. I can deal with logistics. These are things that you learn to deal with when you've been in the mountains a lot. Risk, all those things. And this was way out of my comfort zone, like the two Papuan women trying to kill each other.
Talk about marital discord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was there ever a time out there when you came really close to not coming back?
You spend a lot of time in the mountains, and there's objective dangers on big mountains that you just can't get away from, right? In fact, like sport climbing and climbing at the local cliffs, although it seems sort of outlandish sometimes, is really quite safe if you follow the rules. Now, when you get into the big mountains, rockfall, avalanches, weather, there are things you can't, you can do everything you can to reduce the risk as much as possible, but you can't remove it completely. And I think that's one of the reasons that, climbing is very appealing to so many people, is because, you can work to eliminate the risk, but the risk is there. And the risk is there. You've got to be focused. It's game on. But I think I want to say it was 97 or maybe 98, somewhere in the late 90s. I was in Pakistan climbing, and I was with a partner, this very strong climber and now guide in Chamonix, Chris Erickson. And we were, sort of the odd thing was we had some climbing objectives, but the weather wasn't really good, and we weren't successful on our climbing objectives. And we were leaving the Concordia area, which is where K2 is, and G1 and G2 in the Karakoram area in Pakistan. And we were then going up this valley, and then we were going to cross over this pass called the Gondogoro Law means pass. And there were two of us. There was Chris and May, and then there were two Balti porters that went with us. We all had big packs on, but they supposedly knew the way, how to get across this pass, and then another 2 days out to this village and this road. Well, it turned out, so we go up this valley, and then it's snowing a little bit, But the farther up the valley we go, and then they're telling us where this pass is, and Chris and I we start going up, and it's getting pretty wind loaded, the snow, and it's light snow. And the further we go towards this pass, which basically it's turning into full on mountaineering, climbing, and we've got an ice axe, and we decide to take the rope out, and we decide to all rope up together, and we're basically guiding these two Balti porters because they don't have very clear, they don't have the skill set, but they're telling us, oh yeah, it's just over this next knoll or this thing on the horizon, and we're going on for hours, and then the sun comes out, and there's some point release going on, and I take the rope, and there's this knoll ahead of us. I go to the base of the knoll straight up because I'm really worried about avalanches, and I don't want to cut the slope at all. And then all of a sudden there's this rumbling, and I had just put in a picket to belay and kind of fix the line. And there's this rumbling and this massive cloud of avalanche dust is rolling down towards us. What happened was that this knoll was probably a 50-foot knoll in this big slope. And the avalanche comes down, it hits the knoll, and the knoll splits the force. And then the whole slope goes that Chris and the two porters at the other end of the rope, but I put in a picket, right? And just by luck, we weren't dragged into the main avalanche and down the slope and killed, right? This was terrifying in itself. And we had to kind of dig out from a little avalanche debris but we were okay. And then we're like, okay, well, the avalanche, it's gone, right? So the slope's not loaded, and the porters are saying, oh yeah, we're just over this next rise. And we just climb the slope that went because it's not going to go again, and we're feeling very safe. And we come over this rise, and we see the avalanche crown, and the crown is like 5 feet tall, right? I mean, it was massive. The fact that we weren't killed is really stunning. But we go above the crown, and then there's another slope up there that's totally loaded, and we're stuck. So we camped in this Bergschrund there, because we figured that if we stayed in the Bergschrund, the avalanche might go over us and maybe later come down. And then we climbed this ridge, and we picked it at like 3 a.m. when it was coldest, and we unroped because we went over one at a time, and then we finally got over the pass, and the windward side was scrubbed clean. We had to do a couple of little rappels, and we got down. And the Baltis were so pleased that they were alive. They said when we got to the village, we were gonna sacrifice a goat. And we got to the village, and they made a big deal of getting this goat, and we sacrificed the goat because we lived. And it was an interesting kind of sub-story in a larger expedition, because usually you think about, you're on a big mountain or you're trying something technical, and that's where the danger is. And this was, going over this pass that people use all the time, right? And the fact that it got loaded, and we got up into it, and we got to a point where we couldn't retreat out of it. And, we were lucky that there was some skill in that we talked, Chris and I said, well, we should go right to that knoll because we won't cut the slope and we might be safe there. And that really was an eye-opening experience, and it was terrifying. And it's made me, since then, I'm very wary of avalanches. They scare me. So I'm very conservative when I'm backcountry skiing, and because I've been in one and I don't like them. So yeah, that was a near-death experience.
Who's the best climber or adventurer you've ever come across?
I mean, there are so many fine climbers, men and women, right? I mean, I was lucky enough to cross paths with Alex Lowe in the early days. All of us looked up to him, and, he did things that you couldn't wrap your head around at the time. His technical ability, his cardiovascular, stamina. Like, he was just a monster. But I mean, there's so many good climbers that I've had the privilege to be around and be inspired with. And, you know, some of them to say were really good friends. There was a guy in Seattle that I was friends with named Chad Kellogg. Unfortunately, he was killed in Patagonia in, I think, 2014. But he was an amazingly strong and motivated climber. He was into speed ascents on big peaks, kind of before its time. But in our own backyard, he did these amazingly technical traverses, and like, he just got better with, you know, almost it seemed like with each season, right? Whether it was in Alaska or in the Himalayas, he was just a guy that was getting stronger and stronger, and really had taken that last step into world-class ability. And I was always inspired by him because he was so committed to his craft, right? That he was always focused on getting better and learning more. And he had this journey that matched that, and that he was by the end, he was a full-on practicing Buddhist. Like, he came from a very chaotic background. So you saw this true hero's journey from it was kind of off the rails and kind of nuts as a young man. And then a number of things happened to him, these trials and tribulations. And he became this very centered Buddhist climber that was collecting this quiver of skill set that put him in an elite category. I kind of liken it to he was at the end, he was this samurai. He was committed to his craft. He had made peace with so many things in his life and had all this balance. And we were robbed of seeing what Chad was going to be able to do. And he was a hometown hero, right? When he was in town, we'd hang out and get food, we'd go climb something. And, he was like that with everybody. So he, on a very personal level, but there's so many alpinists that are doing such hard committing things. It's truly amazing.
When I was talking to John Turk about, kind of what separates those who survive from those who don't, and the really sketchy, on the edge type expeditions, he said that presence, being present in the moment, focused in the moment, was one of the key aspects. And when you brought up Kellogg being a Buddhist and having come to resolve a lot of issues, I wonder if that played in it too, where being present.
I mean, I think to be a fine climber, you have to be present. You really have to be present in the moment, because everything you do matters. And I think I should have touched on this earlier, but that's one of the things I love about climbing. In this day and age where, you can push work back till Monday, you can there are not enough things that you can do that everything you do in that craft matters. Like how you tie your knot, how you belay, the decisions you make, they all matter in the moment. And I think you're right. To be, a really strong climber, you have to be present, and people talk about getting in flow state. The problem is with this cutting edge climbing, this true alpine, technical, cutting-edge rock and ice climbing at altitude, it's really dangerous. There's too many things that can go wrong. Unfortunately, there's so many good climbers that have been killed over the last 20 years. So I'm not so, you have to be present to negotiate the technical difficulties, but you have to be willing to accept this risk. And being present or not is not going to mitigate that risk. So it's part of it. It's just a factor in this type of climbing if you're involved in cutting edge alpine climbing now.
From all your travels and experiences, what lessons have you learned that you can share with us?
I think that for me, climbing is really, there's a cerebral journey to it. There's a very emotional journey to it. There's a physical journey to it. And all those things, I learn every time I go out something about myself on one of those levels. But I think as I've gotten older, I'm much more appreciative of the process, right? Because when we get older, I'm 56. I'm not as strong as I was. I've had a lot of injuries. You're working around stuff. There's these frustrations that your body's not performing like it used to. And I think that I'm becoming much more appreciative of the process of climbing. It doesn't have to be hard, but that process where, there is risk, there's skill involved, your response, what you do matters. And I think most importantly, the partnerships, like who you get to climb with trumps everything else. To go out and, whether it's climbing locally or on something big that's much more involved, who you go it's a gift that you get to share this experience with people. And I think that's where I've really ended up. It's like, and there are all these people I love being in the mountains with and sharing this journey with them. And so I think, as a kid, as a climber, you care about the summits more than anything else. And I was lucky in '94, I got to summit Everest. So I got to check that box as a young man. And, I get to step back and, concentrate on other things that seem more valuable in that process of climbing. So maybe it's just maturity. I'm hoping to be maturing at some level.
In today's world, where it seems like every mountain's been climbed and every ocean's been dived, every jungle's been walked or explored, how do you find adventure?
That's a really good question, how we find adventure, right? And I think that the unique thing is everybody gets to define it for themselves, right? So climbing Everest in this sort of adventure travel style might be someone's ultimate adventure. Great. Let them go do that, right? That's meaningful to them. I think about it in terms of the experience, right? And there are these two like matrix, like an X and Y axes. And like on one, you'll have authentic and unauthentic, right? And one will be predictable and unpredictable. Now we get to choose where we end up in that framework. So going to Disneyland with the kids is very predictable and very unauthentic. But, you have fun with the kids when you do your Disneyland, Disney World trip, right? It doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning. But on the other end of like authentic and unpredictable will be going to Mogadishu in Somalia, right? Like it'd be total chaos and dangerous. So when I look at adventure, it's like, for me, what am I doing that the outcome isn't certain, right? And that there's an authenticity in part of the process, whether you're going to new areas that you have to figure out. Because you mentioned that, like, the four corners of the world have been mapped and explored, right? So I think it boils into what brings you that meaning that puts you in a place where it's uncertain and authentic, right? And that's the beauty of exploration. We get to pick it. We get to pick what we want to do. Like, is it trekking over, getting that map out, drink some whiskey and going, I don't want to go on an 8,000 meter peak, but I think I can trek from here to here in 2 months, which is about what it would take you to 6 weeks, right? And there's amazing value to that because you're doing something new. It's uncertain, and to you, it's authentic. So I think that while the world has been, mapped, we all get to define what adventure is. And for me, it's trying to do something authentic and unpredictable.
Yeah, the combination of there's a bit of risk, there's problems that you need to solve, and in places that inspire you and meeting new people that also inspire you, I think.
Right. And sharing this process with people that you like, that you connect with. And then there's that journey. So, you're getting the physical, you're getting the emotional, you're getting the cerebral, all wrapped into one. And I think that's the hallmark of a good adventure, is all that coming together and doing something that the outcome wasn't certain and you had to figure it out.
Do you have any adventures coming up, or ones that you've broken out the whiskey, you've broken out the map, and you're contemplating going on?
Well, I love Nepal, right? And I love being in that Sherpa culture, and I love being in the Khumbu, which is the Everest region. And there's some peaks in there that never get climbed that are pretty small, that relative to the 8,000 meter peaks, that you can go with one person and not pay a huge peak fee and climb them alpine style. So you have that process, and there's actually some unclimbed peaks in that area. So I have a sneaky suspicion I'm looking at maps, right? Like that's part of the equation that perhaps this spring I'll be doing something in Nepal. I've got the map out, and I certainly like whiskey. So
currently you're involved in some organizations. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I do some nonprofit things, and one organization I'm involved with is called the Z Foundation, and it's spelled DZI. And this organization does community-initiated development work in rural Nepal. And I feel like Nepal has given so much to me and my family over the years, over generations, that it's a way for me to give back to the community. So they do education projects, clean water projects, agricultural projects, community health projects, and they do really good work. So I'm involved with them. I actually chair the organization. And that's what I do in Nepal. And then in Seattle, I'm involved in Seattle Mountain Rescue. So I figured that, I can give back with my climbing, my climbing skill set. And that organization, anything that happens in King County that requires, technical skills, ropes, steep angle stuff, I'm part of a team that does that. And we get called out on a regular basis. And that's actually quite gratifying to give back to the community that way. So those are two things that, I figured I got to build up some karmic points as I get older that are very near and dear to me. So the Z Foundation and Seattle Mountain Rescue, and it feels good to give back.
We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks. This went by pretty quickly. Thank you for leading the conversation and inviting me on the show. It's been a fun morning.
It's been a pleasure. And we need to have you come on back and share some more stories and find out what you've been up to.
Well, I look forward to that. Well, have a great day. Thanks.
All right, Brent. We'll see you down the road.
Bye now.
Thank you for joining us. We'll see you down the road when we get together again, share a glass of whiskey, and hear more stories of adventure as told by those who live them. Until then, check us out at michaeljreinhart.com, where you'll find more of my work as an adventure photojournalist. Photos, videos, and articles of interesting people, mysterious places, and exotic cultures from the wild places of the world.